exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu.
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 91 of How to Be, with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Since 2020, there's been significant increase in media attention given to matters of diversity and social justice. Far from it. Finally, the important matters of equality, justice, and advocacy for marginalised communities have taken centre stage in our social media feeds and on our televisions. But we must go beyond the hashtags and post shares to truly make lasting impact. Failing to listen to minority voices is a dangerous precursor to groupthink, when excessive group cohesiveness leads to a false sense of invulnerability and a disconnection from the world outside the team. So how do we amplify minority voices? Here is Andrea Nero, PhD, founder and CEO of Nero Strategies Group, and author of Beggars and Kings, Marginalized People in the Discourses of Early American Scientific Societies on her views.
I grew up as a poor, queer, indigenous adjacent, and disabled woman, and it stifled my growth to not see those groups represented as successful in American history. I eventually pursued my PhD in American history with the end goal of writing histories that read the silences of white records to illuminate the roles of marginalized people in American successes. Basically, I didn't really see a lot of people from where I came from achieving things, and I think it had a lot to do with this lack of representation. My last major work, Beggars and Kings, successfully demonstrated that the scientific work done in the young United States was entirely reliant on the very people it excluded, meaning Black people, Indigenous folks, women, and the poor. I think my methodology of reading between the lines of history is a key way we can return voices to marginalized Americans who are no longer with us and help repair some of the damage going forward.
Our first book is from Zahed Sultan, who is an award-winning multimedia artist, culture producer, filmmaker, and social entrepreneur of Kuwaiti Indian heritage. His work focuses on the intersection between social justice, technology, and culture, and has been presented across various media formats and IRL spaces. He is the founder of a combined arts organisation in the UK and a social impact organisation in Kuwait. Sultan receives particular attention for his audiovisual dance performances, which have been presented internationally. We're talking about the book he created, Haramacy, a collection of stories prescribed by voices from the Middle East, South Asia, and the diaspora. It was great speaking with him, hence here's a snippet of our chat. But find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com or on the YouTube channel.
It's pronounced Haramacy, and it's a combination, well, it's a play on words, really. It's a play on the word haram and the word pharmacy. Now, if you grew up in the Middle East or South Asia, the word haram, or forbidden, is ubiquitous when you're growing up in a household, and it's used as a sort of blanket statement that once it's thrown at you, you can't really question it because it has very deep societal, religious, and sort of like historical sort of trajectory to it or weight to it. And so growing up, this phrase is very, like, as I mentioned, kind of present in your life when you want to push boundaries or you ask questions that necessarily you may or may not should be asking. And so you grow up with this almost barrier you're surrounded by, or like in the style you're surrounded by. And it can have a lot of sort of debilitating effects, I think, especially if you're a woman growing up in our societies. And so pharmacy, as we know, is a space where we go into to cure our usually topical ailments, right? Sometimes they're usually deeper if you have a prescription from a doctor. So Haramacy is really a combination of both of the words, where it's a space you walk into to cure these proverbial ailments that you've kind of incurred over time. And you're now in a space that allows you to kind of ask these questions and reflect on these questions and hopefully have them answered, or at least feel like you're in good company and a safe space to be able to tackle them and to find clarity, whether within that space or thereafter. The name came to me, which I think is an interesting story. I was invited to do a performance in Paris several years ago, and I was walking with a friend down a cobbled path in Paris, And as you know, most pharmacy signs have these like neon green lights on them with that very, that traditional sort of snake wrapped around, it's not a beaker, but, something from a lab essentially. And it just so happens they were walking by this one pharmacy and the word P from the neon sign had blown out. So it said Haramacy basically on it. And I turned to my friend and I was like, oh, what an incredible name. What an incredible idea it would be to create something called Haramacy. And so a year later, that manifested into a residency program and live performance program. And from that program, I guess it planted the seed to create this book, which has been 3 years in the making. And alongside the development of the program, which has been kind of just growing incrementally, slowly over time, with its initial roots in London. And now we took it in the last year and a half to Bristol and Birmingham as well. I remember I had written 2 parts. And the first part was very clinical. And it sort of explained in a much more formal sense what I explained and how I got to this idea of Haramacy. The second was kind of just purging all these stories onto a page and then looking at it, because after you sort of like had been through everyone else's submissions, it felt really sort of not dense, but it felt almost like restrictive to just put something that was clinical to start this book off, where you pick up this book, which I think the artwork is fantastic by this incredible Syrian graphic designer who I'm working with for years. She's the original designer of the concept for Haramacy. And I didn't want the book to start off whatsoever in a space where it felt restricted. I really wanted it to be like this journey of stories that had an arc and came back down again. And even when it came to, so the one tidbit I want to share was, when we submitted our manuscript to the publisher, they had come back and after each essay, they included bios of each of the authors, which we had submitted, as part of our manuscript. So you read an essay, you had the author's bio, so on and so forth. And I was like, I feel like it breaks the flow if every time a story is finished and suddenly like you're being taken to a background of somebody. I felt like the stories only need to be read as a cohesive body of work, and then so that they sort of like roll into each other, because that's how they were intended. And then once we reached the end of the book, we had the co-editors, Dhruva Balram and Tara Joshi, share an editor's note. I shared a background on the intention and concept for Haramacy, and then each of our authors' bios, essentially. It still feels to this day that it gives the book a space to have a starting point, an arc, and then a space of completion. I mean, the last essay we have in the book is by Kieran Yates, who expresses the importance of rest, which I think is really powerful to end the book with, and like understanding or just reflecting on this space of what rest means. We, out of pure coincidence. So the idea for the book came about in the summer of 2019. By the time we raised the initial sort of tranche of funding and then secured all the writers, secured the editor first to invite another co-editor on board and then commissioned the writing. This took us into March of 2020. As anyone who's been alive on this planet for the last few years knows, that was the initiation of an unexpected pandemic. So it was a really interesting space for us where all of us were writing pieces, short stories or essays or reflections at the beginning of a period that all of us felt vulnerable in and uncomfortable in. So we had to approach this with a lot of care from the get-go, right? Now, from a personal perspective, the pandemic for me, besides how we all collectively felt, there was definitely a sort of a particular time frame within the pandemic where I felt a bit liberated, because I moved to London sort of 4 years before, and I was sort of had one foot here, one foot back home in Kuwait, and I felt slightly torn. Like I almost had this, I was on this dialysis to back home because it was what I knew. It was my community. It was my space of comfort. But I'd made this, life decision to be present here. And the pandemic allowed me this space of detachment, allowed me to be present here. And with that presence, and I'm sure I'm not unique in this, there was a lot of time in the first just a few months to just sit and reflect on things. And I can honestly say to you that those first few months were, as a creative, as an artist, they were very fulfilling, because it just gave you the space to kind of do things you may or may not have at the time to do, at another period of time in life. And for me particularly, somehow I started to reflect on this idea of generational traumas, which I can't tell you I understood beforehand, to be completely frank with you. Because I don't know if I had the space or maybe the emotional maturity to really sit down and think about it. And so alongside writing this essay, actually I released a song and a music video called Hindi Majnoon. And Majnoon, if you know in Hindi, Arabic, basically means crazy Indian. And this song is I call it a pop nostalgia song. And I sing it between Arabic, English, and Hindi. And it's actually an ode to my mother. And it's a narrative song in a way, very pop. It's a pop song, but it's a narrative song about my experiences growing up in Kuwait and being bullied for being half Indian and feeling shame for being half Indian in Kuwait, and giving respect to my mother, and me coming to terms with the fact that actually being someone that's from a dual culture is actually my strength. And I cycle through these sort of like fast-paced, or very like glimpses of stories, and the chorus or the hook always goes back to like, if you see my mother, how beautiful she is, and I am this person, I am Indian, and it is a part of who my identity is, etc., etc. Now, putting that song out into the world, I have this habit also on social media when I'm introducing a new body of work is to start conversations with my audience, right? Asking questions because a collective effort. And so the first kind of poll I put up on Instagram, my stories was, did you experience bullying when you were a child? And I just had a flood of people writing me stories on DMs. And I mean, that process was so overwhelming of initiating conversations around bullying, etc. And in that period, I started to share my personal stories. And one particular one, which I'll share with you, was on my civil ID card, national ID in Kuwait, I actually have an Indian name. My name is Zahed, but my Indian or my second given name is Tisha in Hindi. And that caused so much grief for me growing up in Kuwait, more on within governmental departments and governmental touch points. You stop at a police checkpoint, etc., etc. And it was so overwhelming for me that I actually, at some point when I was a very young adult, tried to go to the courts and change it. And I never shared that really with anybody, but I did in these stories and took a picture of my ID card and told that story, amongst several other stories, and a few of them are in the book. So I remember sort of purging these ideas or purging stories, and they were quite powerful for me because it's like you're freeing yourself, right? Like, as I don't think it's, unique to me. It's like when you give something a voice, you free yourself from it, right? You will step aside and it becomes devoid of you. And yes, obviously it forms a part of your identity, but it doesn't define you anymore, right? And so it was almost harmonious that I had worked on this project and then I worked on the essay for the book.
As Sultan mentioned, the title is a play on the Arabic word haram, meaning forbidden or indecent, and the English word pharmacy. As such, it provides a tonic for the assumptions, omissions, and reductions that define contemporary discussions about race and society in the UK. In 1990, the editor Sultan recalls waking to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, marking his earliest memory. Despite confusion, his father's thoughtful actions during the crisis stand out. He recounts his escape, leaving behind childhood memories. Born to an Indian mother and Kuwaiti father, he navigates cultural duality. The author's experiences prompt a collection of stories from diverse voices, highlighting issues like identity and acceptance. Through storytelling, the book aims to foster understanding and unity among those who have felt othered. Sultan says storytelling is a universal tool that we can use to unearth pervasive issues and encourage meaningful dialogue by exploring the idiosyncrasies of cultures while celebrating their similarities, can create an interlocking space that feels like home. In the face of emotional and professional heartbreak, the first writer, freelance journalist Aina J. Khan, shares her experiences. A medical scare prompts introspection and a journey towards self-acceptance. As a British Muslim woman of dual heritage, one side is Pashtun. She navigates vulnerability and the pressure to succeed, seeking validation in both love and career. Born in West London at the turn of the 1990s, when the term British Muslim hadn't been widely adopted by the Muslim community, she was a state-educated first-generation graduate, raised by a single-parent mother who relied on state benefits and free school dinners, and as she describes, was the poster child for social mobility. This also meant that everything she achieved was through meritocracy and having to utilize unpaid work experience placements, internships, and well-meaning positive action schemes as a way to get into journalism. Amid societal challenges like Brexit and racism, she recognizes the power of storytelling to redefine identity. Through pain and growth, she learns that embracing vulnerability and self-love is crucial, and asserting that stories can reshape cultural narratives and foster understanding. Her journey of self-discovery highlights the importance of resilience and authenticity. In The Ballad of the Kangaroo Bandit, award-winning journalist and editor Joe Zadeh reflects on his own mixed-race identity and the complex nature of race and ethnicity. He draws parallels to the elusive bank robber dubbed the Kangaroo Bandit, who baffled law enforcement with his ability to appear as different races to different witnesses. The author highlights the fluidity of racial perception and experiences the internal conflict and confusion of being racially ambiguous. He navigates encounters with his racism and privileges while contemplating his role as someone who has experienced both white privilege and discrimination. The essay emphasizes the intricate interplay of identity, societal categorization, and the need to expand discussions beyond traditional racial constructs. In Shelter in Place, investigative journalist Sanjana Varghese talks about profound changes brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic, shifting public and private spaces, blurring the lines between work and home, and reshaping how society functions. The concept of public space has transformed, with people relying heavily on the internet for work, communication, and community. The pandemic revealed the existing inequalities in access to housing, employment, and the digital world, disproportionately affecting marginalized communities. She discusses the tension between individual and collective responsibility and explores the potential for a new structure of feeling that values community and solidarity, envisioning a changed world post-pandemic. The Shallows by British-Lebanese author Nasri Atala is a personal essay that delves into the Esquire Middle East editor-in-chief's experience of grappling with issues of identity, belonging, and mental well-being. Atala reflects on moments of feeling disconnected and the impact of his dual British-Lebanese identity. He discusses his struggles with breathing and explores how therapy, both group and individual, helps him navigate his complex sense of self. The Mediterranean emerges as a symbolic space that bridges his identities and offers a sense of freedom. Atala's narrative highlights the intersection of personal history, cultural background, and mental health in shaping one's understanding of identity and space. In The Illegitimate Indian by belly dancer and writer Serene Sinti, two contrasting grandmothers, one dark-skinned and twinkle-eyed, the other fair-skinned and reserved, raises questions about her connection. Isha, the great-grandmother born to the Banjara gypsies in Punjab, had a mother who was a dancing gypsy and a father from Rajasthan, a singing gypsy. The family's gypsy heritage encompassed dance, song, crafts, and magic. Her story highlights the diversity within the gypsy community, challenging stereotypes. Despite her varied lifestyles, a shared history emerges through the Holocaust, as the family endured the Porajmos. Sinti explores her complex connections to India, Germany, and the UK. She then discusses her gypsy heritage, struggles with cultural acceptance, and the challenges faced by her people, combating stereotypes and striving for recognition. The story delves into her personal experiences, including trauma, cultural appropriation, and the quest for authentic representation, all while highlighting the ongoing fight for gypsy rights and a sense of belonging. On Being Loud by Guardian's global music critic, Amar Kalia portrays the writer's journey from a quiet, culturally conflicted child to a self-expressive individual. The narrative touches upon his initial struggles with music, particularly the tabla, and his quiet upbringing as an Indian immigrant in the UK. As he discovers the drums and jazz, he finds a way to channel his emotions and assert his identity. The story delves into the significance of loudness as a means of self-expression and defiance against societal pressures to conform, ultimately leading to the author's realization of the power of mistakes and the need to strive for more as well as being loud. Who Owns a Story by author, filmmaker, and aid worker Salim Haddad delves into the complexities of storytelling, focusing on the intersection of queer and Arab identities within the context of Western narratives. Haddad reflects on his personal journey as a queer Arab man and writer, navigating the intricacies of representation, identity, and cultural understanding. Haddad discusses the power dynamics of storytelling and its role in constructing collective imaginations, highlighting the impact of narratives deployed by governments, media, and far-right groups. He advocates for embracing the complexity of diverse identities and reclaiming the narrative space to challenge dominant binaries, emphasizing truth, empathy, and nuance in storytelling. In My Love is Vast, but So is My Difference, artist Nuf Al-Himyari reflects on love, identity, and intimacy as a young diasporic individual. She recalls watching New Year's fireworks with a former lover, mirroring her relationship's distant yet hopeful nature. Born in Saudi Arabia, her understanding of love carries ancestral burdens and trauma, influencing her relationship struggles. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, Al-Himyari turns inward through inner child meditations, navigating the conflict between parental expectations and personal desires. She seeks to heal, acknowledging her voice and needs, eventually redefining love, intimacy, and belonging as products of her diverse heritage and resilient spirit. Her journey highlights the complexity of forging meaningful connections in a multifaceted world. In On Saying Goodbye, one of the book's editor, Tara Joshi, reflects on her family's immigrant experience, grappling with the distance that separates her from her ancestral roots in India. Raised in the UK by Indian parents, she describes a bittersweet blend of cultures that shaped her identity. Joshi contemplates the concept of home, the pain of long-distance goodbyes, and the weight of collective grief. She mourns the loss of her grandparents, separated by thousands of miles, and wonders if immigration itself is a form of grief. Amid these reflections, she seeks to create new definitions of family, heritage, and love, while embracing her dual identity. Dhruva Balaram thinks about his journey as an Indian immigrant in Canada, and his struggle to reconcile his identity amid cultural challenges. In his grandparents' home, time seems suspended, memories clinging to the air. His narrative spans his grandparents' migration to Toronto in the 1960s, his own immigration in 2003, and his attempts to fit in by crafting a distorted identity for acceptance. Balaram details his toxic relationship with whiteness, internalized racism, self-harm, and the conflict between the idealized India he fabricated and reality. Through introspection and engagement with diaspora art, he finds strength in a diverse, resilient South Asian community embracing his true identity as Dhruva Balaram. And the final essay is from Guardian journalist Kieran Yates, who we interviewed for her book All the Houses I've Ever Lived In, where she talks about the concept of rest within the context of working-class immigrant communities. Yates explores the lineage of labour and exhaustion in her family, spanning generations of immigrants who have worked long and demanding hours. The essay delves into the racial disparities in sleep quality, highlighting studies that reveal worse sleep experiences amongst communities of colour, particularly black subjects. The narrative intertwines personal anecdotes, historical context, and socio-political analysis to emphasize how rest is a privilege and a form of resistance. Her essay ultimately calls for recognizing rest as a political act and integrating it into the fabric of equitable societies. Our final book is from Mariam Khan, who is a British writer and activist. She is the editor of It's Not About the Burqa, an anthology of essays by Muslim women about the contemporary Muslim female experience. Taking one of the most politicized and misused words associated with Muslim women and Islamophobia, It's Not About the Burqa is poised to change all that. These voices you won't see represented in national news headlines. 17 Muslim women speaking frankly about the hijab and wavering faith, about love and divorce, about feminism, queer identity, sex, and the twin threats of a disapproving community and a racist country. Here she is speaking to the Scottish Book Trust.
If I could change the conversation about Muslim women, I would say Muslim women are not traditionally submissive, Muslim women are not oppressed, and Muslim women are not a monolith. We have many different facets to our identity. In 2016, David Cameron, our ex-Prime Minister, gave a speech in which he described Muslim women as being traditionally submissive. This sparked an idea in my mind, and it also made me realise that I did not recognise the Muslim women that this man was talking about, this incredibly educated and powerful man. Muslim women took to social media, holding up placards that read, doctor, war survivor, PhD student, mother, scientist, teacher, all of the roles that we don't recognise or see Muslim women play in our society. It's Not About the Burqa is a collection of essays by 17 different women, because I was afraid that if I wrote a book by myself, people would still think that you could only be a Muslim woman in a singular way. So the book covers faith, feminism, sexuality, race, identity, divorce, marriage, LGBT, being an LGBT Muslim, your relationship with hijab. So many different facets to the Muslim female identity. And all we hear constantly is the one: Muslim women are oppressed, Muslim women are submissive, Muslim women are not those things, and Muslim women are telling you who they are now. My essay in the book is called Feminism Needs to Die. Islam is a religion that empowers women, but often in society we are perceived as oppressed and submissive. My essay challenges how feminism only works for one certain group of women in society. Those who are white, straight, middle class, cis, able-bodied, have certain privileges that the rest of us do not have. In my essay, I conclude that we should all be intersectional feminists, that we should all recognise how power structures overlap to benefit certain people, and how those people need to work harder to create a space to include us all. Feminism is no good for me if it doesn't work for all women. If we can't sit at that table, we will create our own.
As explained, in January 2016, David Cameron's comments about Muslim women as traditionally submissive sparked a powerful response. Muslim women held placards challenging the stereotype of traditionally submissive. This incident led to the realization that Muslim women's voices were often filtered through media and government. It's Not About the Burqa is a collection of essays by Muslim women reclaiming their identity, discussing topics like hijab, faith, love, queer identity, and more. By engaging with the narrative around terms like burqa, the book aims to dismantle stereotypes and empower Muslim women to speak for themselves and be heard. In Too Loud, Swears Too Much, and Goes Too Far, Mona El-Tahawi reflects on her book Headscarves and Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. The award-winning columnist and international feminist speaker discusses challenging misogyny within her culture and faith, advocating for social and sexual revolutions alongside political changes. She embraces the labels too loud, swears too much, and goes too far as compliments, defying patriarchal expectations for women. She highlights the dilemma faced by Muslim women caught between Islamophobic biases and patriarchal norms within their own communities. She writes, "Patriarchy demands that all women, but the more women fall within intersections of oppression, the more they are expected to live by those demands. And Muslim women are especially vulnerable to what I call the trifecta of oppressions: misogyny, which is faced by all women, racism, faced by women of colour, and Islamophobia, faced by Muslims. Muslim women are caught between a rock, an Islamophobic and racist right wing that is eager to demonize Muslim men, and to that end misuses our words and the ways we resist misogyny within our Muslim communities, and a hard place. Our Muslim communities that are eager to defend Muslim men, and to that end try to silence us and shut down the ways we resist misogyny. Both the rock and the hard place are more concerned with each other than they are with Muslim women." But she also reminds us that the role of the writer is to tell society what it pretends it does not know. The racist right-wing Islamophobes conveniently ignore, or pretend not to know, that misogyny is not exclusive to Muslim men. El-Tahawi asserts the need for a revolutionary stance against misogyny, racism, and bigotry, rejecting oppressive dichotomies. Revolutions rattle the privileged and discomfort the complacent. They're never about the comfortable majority. She says we must jump off that seesaw because neither of its sides care about Muslim women. We must jump into a space we have created and from which we can launch a revolution against misogyny, racism, Islamophobia, and all forms of bigotry. In the essay Immodesty is the Best Policy by Coco Khan, the author reflects on the concepts of modesty, identity, and societal expectations within the context of South Asian culture. The Guardian journalist reminisces about her childhood, recounting how societal norms and the weight of family history shaped her perceptions of modesty and beauty. She also engages in a discussion with her mother about modesty culture and its impact on women's lives. This includes Afia, a woman who defies societal expectations and embraces her passion for dancing, leading to empowerment and personal growth. The essay touches on how the concept of modesty intersects with gender roles, societal pressures, and personal empowerment, ultimately challenging traditional norms and encouraging individuality. The First Feminist by Sufia Ahmed recounts the award-winning writer's journey as a Muslim woman, discovering her identity and breaking free from cultural constraints. Ahmed finds inspiration in the life of Khadija bint Khuwailid, the wife of Prophet Muhammad. Khadija's independence and business success challenge patriarchal norms, empowering Ahmed to resist societal pressures. Growing up in an Asian community, she battles perceptions of being a fatherless child, eventually finding strength in her mother's resilience and her own aspirations. Ahmed's experiences navigating misogyny in academia and parliament shape her advocacy for women's rights. Her novel, Secrets of the Henna Girl, aims to empower Muslim women by highlighting their agency. Through Khadija's legacy, Ahmed becomes a feminist advocate for equality and individual choice. Entrepreneur Nafisa Bakar explores the complex issue of representation of Muslims in mainstream media and consumerism. The co-founder of Amalia.com criticizes the commodification of Muslim identity and argues that the push for representation often focuses on aesthetics and surface-level diversity rather than meaningful inclusion. Bakar discusses the limitations and challenges of representation within a capitalist framework, highlighting instances where Muslim individuals are celebrated for breaking barriers, while their voices and perspectives are marginalized or dismissed. She emphasizes the need for Muslim representation to be rooted in authenticity, inclusivity, and a deep understanding of diverse Muslim experiences, rather than conforming to external standards. The Clothes of My Faith by Afia Ahmed explores the complexities of Muslim women's relationship with religious clothing, particularly the hijab and veil, in the context of fashion and representation. She highlights the struggle for acceptance and representation in Western societies, where these garments have become symbols of identity, empowerment, and resistance. However, the teacher, writer, and researcher criticizes the fashion industry for commodifying and superficializing religious attire, often excluding those who do not fit conventional beauty ideals. The essay emphasizes the need to differentiate between genuine religious observance and conforming to secular standards, while urging Muslim women to maintain confidence in their faith and identity. In Life Was Easier Before I Was Woke, by Yasmin Midad Abdel Majid, the author reflects on her personal journey as a Muslim woman navigating various identities, biases, and challenges. She discusses her upbringing as a Sudanese immigrant in Australia, her experiences as a female engineer on oil rigs, and her awakening to systemic inequalities. Abdel Majid shares a process of coping mechanisms and impression management, eventually realizing the importance of embracing her identity and advocating for substantive equality. Her essay also highlights the author's encounter with controversy and her commitment to fighting for unconditional equality while acknowledging the complexities of personal growth and change. In There's No Such Thing as a Depressed Muslim, Jamila Hekmoun shares her personal experiences with mental health struggles within the Muslim community. The mental health advocate recounts a panic attack while studying abroad and highlights the challenges she faced in seeking help due to cultural and religious stigma. She discusses the prevailing belief that a devout Muslim cannot be depressed and explores the intersection of mental health and Islamic faith. She writes, "A key idea within Islamic thought is that Islam offers its beliefs totality, that it can provide solutions, but that attitude can result in a very black and white view of mental health." However, she volunteered at the charity Inspirited Minds, which was established in 2014 to answer a need for a faith-sensitive mental health organization. Studies have found that Muslims are often reluctant to get help regarding their mental health as they face stigma from both within the community and outside it. Muslims are often afraid that they may experience Islamophobia when seeing non-Muslim therapists and practitioners, particularly because that therapist may not understand the role of faith as either part of their problem or part of the possible solution. Hekmoun addresses misconceptions such as associating mental health issues with a lack of religious commitment. She emphasizes the importance of understanding the complexities of mental health within a religious context and the need for faith-sensitive support systems. Her essay encourages dialogue and dispels myths, ultimately promoting a holistic approach to mental well-being within the Muslim community. Mariam Khan's essay, who is the editor of the anthology Feminism Needs to Die, discusses the challenges and contradictions faced by Muslim women in the context of feminism, particularly within the framework of what she terms white feminism. Khan argues that while Islam has provided empowerment and rights to women from its inception, many young Muslim women in Western societies are exposed to feminism primarily through a lens that does not consider their cultural and religious identities. The author addresses the term white feminism, which she defines as an ideology that centers the needs of white, cisgender, able-bodied women whilst purporting to speak for all women. Khan expresses frustration with the exclusionary nature of this feminism, which often disregards the complexities of intersectionality and fails to recognize the unique experiences of Muslim women. She shares personal experiences and highlights instances where mainstream feminism has overlooked or marginalized Muslim women's voices and concerns. Khan ultimately calls for the evolution of feminism into an intersectional movement that acknowledges and includes the diverse experiences and identities of all women. Hijabi Revolution is a personal essay by Afshan D'Souza Lodi that chronicles her journey with the hijab, her identity as a Muslim woman, and her experience of navigating intersecting aspects of her identity, including her sexuality. The essay reflects on the writer and performer's relationship with the hijab, the challenges of being a visibly Muslim woman in a Western context, her struggles with self-acceptance as a queer individual within her faith, and a decision to reclaim her identity without fear. Through her narrative, D'Souza Lodi challenges stereotypes, binaries, and societal expectations, asserting her right to exist authentically as a complex and multifaceted individual. In 8 Notifications by multi-award-winning journalist Salma Hydrani, the author recounts her experiences as a journalist writing about Muslim women in the UK. The essay follows her journey of confronting online harassment, threats and challenges, while trying to shed light on the lives of Muslim women. Through her articles, she aims to dispel myths and misconceptions challenging the stereotypes surrounding Muslim women. The author reflects on the impact of her work, the mixed reaction she receives, and her evolving feelings towards her journalism career. Despite the fear and adversity she faces, she finds validation and satisfaction in making a difference through her writing. Amna Salim discusses the challenges of being a Muslim feminist in Shame, It Knows Your Name, caught between the pressures of radical Islamists and white supremacists. The Scottish-Pakistani writer navigates toxic masculinity in her community, critiquing the shame culture that affects both men and women. Drawing from her own personal experiences, Salim highlights the power of humour and resilience in dismantling the narratives of oppressors. She advocates for change within her community, rejecting misogyny and shame, while emphasising the importance of self-worth and individual agency. Ultimately, she aims to create a better future for generations to come. A Woman of Substance by Saima Mir recounts the author's journey through 2 marriages, both ending in divorce, within the context of South Asian culture and Islamic principles. The award-winning journalist shares her experience of navigating societal expectations, family pressures, and the clash between cultural norms and religious teachings. In her first marriage, she faces an oppressive environment with her husband's controlling mother. In her second marriage, she seeks a partner who respects her independence. Mir emphasizes the importance of individual agency, shedding light on the misconceptions around women's rights in Islam and challenging patriarchal norms. The essay showcases her resilience, growth, and pursuit of happiness against societal odds. Agenda Denied, Islam, Sex and the Struggle to Get Some by Salma El-Wadani is a personal and societal exploration of the challenges and taboos surrounding sex and sexuality within Muslim communities. The activist shares her experience of losing her virginity and the clash between her upbringing, cultural expectations, and her own desires. El-Wadani argues that traditional interpretations of Islam often perpetuate shame, guilt, and a lack of information around sex. She emphasizes the need for open conversations, education, and dismantling cultural taboos to empower Muslim women and men to embrace their sexuality, challenge harmful norms, and achieve a healthier relationship with their bodies and desires. In her essay, How Not to Get Married, or Why an Unregistered Nikah is No Protection for a Woman, lawyer Aina Khan highlights the legal challenges faced by Muslim women in the UK due to unregistered religious marriages. The outdated Marriage Act of 1949 only recognises Church of England, Jewish and Quaker marriages. This leaves marriages from other faiths, including Islam, unregistered and lacking legal protection. Khan's Register Our Marriage, or ROM campaign, aims to raise awareness about this issue and advocates for compulsory registration of marriages. Unregistered marriages result in women's vulnerability, restricted rights, and difficulties in obtaining divorces. Khan addresses the cultural, societal, and legal factors contributing to this problem and emphasizes the importance of empowering Muslim women to protect their rights within Islamic marriage contracts. Rifa Rafiq reflects on her experiences as a Black Muslim woman, navigating the complex intersectionality of her identity in her essay, Not Just a Black Muslim Woman. She recounts a journey from Zanzibar to England, highlighting the challenges of being Black, Muslim, and a woman. She discusses the tensions and stereotypes she encounters within various communities and strives for self-acceptance. The trainee solicitor emphasizes the need for Black Muslim women to confidently and unapologetically embrace their identities, challenge norms, and define themselves beyond labels. The narrative calls for recognition and understanding of the multidimensional lives these women lead, moving towards a more inclusive and empathetic world. In her essay Between Submission and Threat, the British State's Contradictory Relationship with Muslim Women, Malia Bouatia discusses the complex and contradictory nature of the British state's interaction. The former president of the National Union of Students highlights how the state simultaneously demonizes and oppresses Muslim women through policies like the Prevent strategy and policing of the hijab, while also positioning itself as a savior by highlighting oppression within Muslim communities. Bouatia emphasizes that this relationship depends on Muslim women's visibility, but silence, making them both targets of Islamophobic policies and props in dominant discourses. She examines counterterrorism measures, the criminalization of Muslim communities, and the politicization of Muslim women's voices, illustrating the challenges they face in both political and public spaces. Bouatia concludes that building alliances with social justice groups is crucial for challenging racism, discrimination, and oppressive policies. Daughter of Stories by poet and creative Nadine Aisha Jasat is on the power of family stories in shaping identity, especially those of her grandmother Ma and her aunt. These women's stories, filled with resilience, resourcefulness, and bravery, helped the author navigate her multi-faith, mixed heritage identity in a world often marked by prejudice and misunderstanding. The book underscores the significance of representation and storytelling in combating oppression and nurturing connection. Jasat's personal journey as a writer and poet becomes a form of resistance against being silenced or defined by others, affirming her unique identity while honouring the legacy of her family. So to sum up, Haramacy by Sultan is as much a call for collective mobilization as it is a vivid account of individual identities. Storytelling becomes yet another tool to counter the narratives of power. As Salim Haddad explains, the point was never to write to change the world. At best, one could write to open up the world somehow, to write through all the powerful narratives that strive to bury your voice. It's Not About the Burqa by Khan is a vital book for non-Muslims and those seeking to understand Muslim feminism in the West. It will also add to an already rigorous body of writing about veiling. While these essays take a courageous and panoramic view of Muslims and Islamic attire, most of the writers agree that acceptance is best achieved by promoting diversity. This may provide a lesson to politicians and opinion writers who should acknowledge that integration requires both host and immigrant to understand each other. Amplifying marginalized voices is crucial for a globalized world. Without any understanding of each other in society, we'll never be able to break down any barriers and integrate communities. It's not up to us to teach, it's up to others to learn and listen. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Thanks to transformative coach Mariam for your lovely comments saying it is jam-packed with life-affirming advice. Before we go, here are Harirata Diallo, a community engagement executive at Imagen Insights, a Gen Z market research and insights platform and database, and Jojo Mehta, who is the co-founder of Stop Ecocide International, chair of the charitable Stop Ecocide Foundation, and convener of the independent expert panel for the Legal Definition of Ecocide, on their views. See you next week.
I think when it comes to amplifying underrepresented voices and giving space and opportunities to marginalised communities, it's all about listening and learning that every single person's story is very unique to them, and not coming in with the assumption of, you know it all. It's about being open-minded and understanding that each person's struggle is different, which means the outcome will always be different as well. It's all about giving the person an opportunity to speak and have a safe space to kind of say what they want to say. And from that, it's also about creating the education and awareness around people. So it's all well that we can listen to the issues and we can come up with the solutions, but if we're not educating people on how to avoid that and, preparing the next generations in how to become a better, not a better person, but like a better version of whatever's happening in the community now, then we're just kind of replaying the same issue, but in different versions. So I think it's very important to create awareness and educating the people around us.
Indigenous communities are the guardians of up to 80% of the Earth's richest biodiversity and climate-regulating biomes, and live on the front lines of ecocide, whether that is sea level rise in the Pacific or deforestation in the Amazon. They have much to teach us on living in balance with nature, and they are often having to defend her against invasive industries in order to protect the ecosystems which, in turn, are actually safeguarding all of us. These Indigenous defenders are often framed as criminals disrupting legitimate business activity, which is a sad reflection on our current system's priorities. Laws are first and foremost supposed to make us safe, and until we protect our most vital ecosystems, we are all in danger. Ecocide law will redress that balance in a powerful way, which is why political and diplomatic proposals to criminalise ecocide are being driven forward in places like Vanuatu and Brazil, as well as other national and regional parliaments around the world. It's time we aligned our laws with what Indigenous cultures deeply understand. When we damage the earth, there are consequences.